Connecticut is moving forward with plans to fight climate change, and our state is no stranger to extreme weather that has caused quite a bit of damage.
Yeah, just last year, Connecticut experienced massive flooding in the Naugatuck Valley and some major brush fires as well. Your chief political reporter, Susan Raff, is telling us more about new legislation being proposed to minimize the damage.
Flooding in the Naugatuck Valley last summer was devastating. Water washed away roads and bridges and destroyed homes and businesses.
I can't tell you how rough it's been for our town. We lost 2 lives.
Oxford's first selectman supports legislation to help cities and towns protect themselves from natural disasters.
Climate change is real, and these extreme weather events are costing us more and more every day.
Repairing roads and bridges in Naugatuck will cost more than $200 million. Heavy rain and flooding also caused damage in Scotland, Basra, and Norwich. And a drought this past fall led to dry conditions ideal for brush fires, including the Hawthorne fire in Berlin that torched more than 100 acres. In August, William Della Camera lost more than 130 acres of his vegetable crop in Northford because of a hailstorm.
We got money from the feds to fix 23 and 24, but could the state have something going forward for the years to come for some sort of climate resiliency?
Cities and towns would be able to apply for matching grants to make improvements. There are also incentives in the bill for homeowners to get flood insurance. However, Governor Lamont and lawmakers now have serious concerns about federal funds after President Trump withdrew the U.S. from international efforts to address climate change.
Extreme weather events, they don't discriminate against Republican or Democrat states.
Another part of this legislation would be for homeowners. Insurance companies would have to notify homeowners if they live in a flood zone. They would have to tell them about the risks and flooding history. Another part would be for residential construction. That would have to be reduced in areas where flooding has been a problem. Your chief political reporter, Susan Raff, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.